Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining our information session today on the Multiculturalism, Indigenous, and Inclusion Grant, or the MIIG grant program. Today, we'll be taking an in-depth look at the MIIG budget form with you. This session builds upon the two general information sessions we held last week and the in-depth application session we held yesterday. If you missed the general information sessions, we recorded it and uploaded it to our website at alberta.ca. My name is Ben Hart, and I'm a Community Grants Advisor with the Community Grants Unit with Alberta Culture and Status of Women. I work on the MIIG program team, along with my colleagues who are with us today, starting with Rochelle.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rochelle Ishmael, and I am the MIIG program coordinator.
Thanks, Rochelle. So if you attended our previous sessions and determined your organization is eligible and is interested in applying for MIIG funding, we hope this session will help you with some budget tips and tricks and give you a better sense of the things we look for in a budget, a sense of what makes a strong budget submission. We don't have a break scheduled for today, so if you need to take a break at any point, please feel free to step away. This session is intended to be interactive. We will walk through the budget template section by section and pause to take questions at the end of each section. If you want to ask a question, you will have two options. You can type a question into the chat box and our team will monitor questions there. Or when invited, after we've taken questions from the chat box, you can ask a question by unmuting your microphone. Just a reminder to please keep your microphones muted, both before and after you ask a question. We would also note that we will prioritize questions that are the most relevant and applicable to all interested applicants, rather than questions that are specific to only one organization. For those more specific questions, we invite you to contact our office directly. We may or may not need the full 2 hours today, but if we run out of time and are not able to answer your question, please contact our office to follow up.
We would love to know who you are and which organization you are representing today. We would greatly appreciate if you'd rename yourselves in the participants list for us. To find the participants list, click the participants button in the main menu bar of Zoom. It will be located at the bottom of your Zoom window. So just reading the directions provided on the screen, hover your mouse over your name in the participants list, then select the More button, click Rename, and enter your name and organization. When you've completed this, please click OK. Right now, I'm homeland of many diverse people in Alberta, including First Nations and Métis, whose ancestors have walked this land since time immemorial. We are grateful to work, live, and learn on this traditional territory that includes Treaties 6, 7, and 8.
Before we jump into the budget template itself, we want to give a quick overview of the MIIG program's financial requirements, including eligible and ineligible sources of matching funding and ineligible expenses. MIIG is a matching grant program, which means you must contribute to the project expenses an amount equal to or exceeding your grant request. By matching the MIIG funding, your organization can demonstrate its commitment to the project and community support for the project. The MIIG program provides up to $25,000 in matching funding. Your matching funding may be in the form of cash, donated labor, so $20 an hour for unskilled labor, $35 an hour for skilled labor, and or donated material services, verified at fair market value. The matching amount can be a combination of all these sources or only one or two. All matching amounts must directly relate to the project.
It is also important to be familiar with sources of matching that will not be considered eligible. Information on ineligible sources of matching can be found in Section 5.3 of the MIIG guidelines and include any project expense deemed as ineligible for funding cannot be used as a match. For example, a volunteer gift card or an operational expense like rent are ineligible project expenses. Likewise, an organization could not list a gift card or rent as a donated material or resource. Wages and salaries associated with the regular ongoing operations of the organization are ineligible. Volunteer time related to fundraising, preparing grant applications, or attending meetings related to regular operations are also ineligible.
In the last slide, we discussed sources of matching that are considered ineligible. In this slide, we'll briefly go over a number of project expenses that are considered ineligible as per section 3.5 of the MIIG guidelines. You'll note that the guidelines do not include a list of all the expenses that are considered eligible. It would be very challenging to create a list that's truly comprehensive. Groups might include legitimate expenses we hadn't thought of before, and the list would be extraordinarily long. Instead, the guidelines discuss in section 3.3 eligible projects like training and education, capacity building, or events, and then list the types of expenses that are ineligible in section 3.5. It's important to not include ineligible expenses in your budget. If we receive a budget with ineligible expenses, we would have to remove those from the budget, which can lead to a reduction in the amount of MIIG funding you can apply for. Examples of ineligible expenses include ongoing operational expenses. These types of expenses, such as the cost of rent and utilities, and salaries, benefits of existing staff, are not eligible. MIIG funding is intended to support standalone initiatives, new programming or resources, as opposed to ongoing operations. Other examples of ineligible expenses include gift cards, participant travel, accommodations, and per diems, administrative costs and fees like legal fees, accounting or bookkeeping fees, volunteer expenses such as honoraria, gifts, gift cards, per diems, with the exception of honoraria and gifts for cultural protocol, and food costs that represent a primary expense of a project or event. There are a number of other ineligible expenses listed in section 3.5, so please take a look prior to completing your budget.
And now, for the moment you've all been waiting for, we are going to walk through the MIIG budget template with you step by step. We will begin by discussing revenues for the project, including your MIIG funding request. It's important to remember that your budget, even though it is a separate document, is considered part of your application package. The first section of your budget, the purple section, tells our team a few important pieces of information, like the amount of grant dollars you are requesting, up to $25,000. Additional revenues for the project that will match or exceed your MIIG grant request. These additional revenues may include your organization's cash contributions, municipal funding, provincial funding, like other Government of Alberta funding, or federal funding, like funding from the Government of Canada, and other funding sources, such as a grant from a private foundation. Any donations made on an in-kind basis, like the total of donated labor plus donated materials and/or services. These are necessary to include in your budget because MIIG is a matching grant program. The other important piece of information in this purple section is the total project funding.
In this slide, we have included some examples for you. And note that your numbers on your budget will be in black font, not pink, like on this example. So in this example, the MIIG applicant is making a grant request of $25,000 to lead 4 community dialogues with a guest speaker about equity, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. You'll want to make sure to fill out this box so that we know how much you need to plan and deliver your project. You are eligible to request up to 50% of the total project cost to a maximum of $25,000. So even if your total project cost is, say, $100,000, you would still only be eligible to apply for $25,000 in MIIG funding. This applicant is also indicating a few different sources of additional revenues, showing our team how they will match the $25,000 MIIG grant request. The organization is indicating it will make a $5,000 cash contribution as part of its matching component. When you enter a cash contribution, we will need to look at financial statements, a recent bank statement, or a band council resolution. When our team sees a cash contribution, we will look into an applicant's financial statements to see if they have any unrestricted cash in its cash reserves, or if the organization is newly formed and does not yet have financial statements, we need to see a recent bank statement indicating that the cash is available for the MIIG project. This organization is also indicating that it plans to match the MIIG grant request through $10,000 in funding from the Government of Canada. You may have noticed that this additional revenue is in a different column than the cash contribution, a column called pending amount. That is because the organization is still waiting to hear back from the Government of Canada as to whether its federal funding request has been approved. Whenever you list anything in the pending amount column, we need you to provide additional information in a separate document, including information on when you expect to find out whether or not you've been successful with the funding request. In this case, when will the federal government notify you of its decision to approve or not approve your request? It would be a good idea in this separate document to also tell us what is your backup plan if this pending funding is not approved. A backup plan could include a fundraising plan or an alternative source of funding. If this information is not provided with your application, expect a member of our team to ask about it once we do an initial review of your application. If we're unable to obtain this information from you, it would significantly reduce your chance of being successful, being approved for a MIIG grant, as it would bring into question your organization's capacity to complete the project, as well as the financial feasibility of the project. The next additional revenue this organization has listed is a confirmed amount, just like the cash contribution mentioned a minute ago. A confirmed amount means that the additional revenues are in place, and there are no uncertainties with this matching. In this case, this organization has indicated that its final additional revenue is $10,000 in in-kind donations, a total of donated labor and material services. What's unique about the MIIG budget template is that donations are listed as both an additional revenue and as an expense, which we will discuss in a few minutes. For now, just know that the expense section is where you will provide the details about donations. Note that if you enter any of these additional revenues, municipal funding, provincial funding, federal funding, or other funding sources, you need to share a letter or email from the funder or donor to verify that these revenues are confirmed. In this case, this organization would not be able to include a letter or email from the Government of Canada because the funding request has not yet been determined. A note about other funders as well. It's important to be aware that every funder has specific requirements associated with the use of their grants or contracts. One of the reasons we ask for a letter from other funders is to verify with them that their dollars can be spent on a MIIG project while also meeting their own funding requirements. Finally, on this slide, be sure to include total project funding. In this example, the total project funding is $50,000. To recap, this $50,000 amount includes the MIIG program grant request of $25,000, the confirmed cash contribution of $5,000, the pending federal funding of $10,000, and the confirmed in-kind donations of $10,000.
Please note that the total project funding, line 12 on page 1, the total revenues discussed on the previous slide, needs to match to the dollar the total project costs at the bottom of the budget template on page 2, line 72. Total project costs include the subtotals of the next three charts in the budget that we will discuss: the anticipated project expenses, plus the donated labor, plus donated materials and services. Now we will discuss the expense side of your MIIG budget. This slide is Section A of your budget, Anticipated Project Expenses. You want to make sure that this section includes only cash costs. If you have a quote from a vendor that includes both cash costs and donated materials or services, only put the cash cost in this chart. The donated materials and services will be captured in the next charts. On the left side of this chart, you will see the title, Detailed Item Description. This column is where you tell us what the specific project expense is. This description could be what is included in a quote source from a vendor. The next column is called Quote Source. This column tells us how you determine the cost or amount of each specific project expense. Whenever possible, you should include a quote for each project expense. The column on the right-hand side is called Total Costs. It is in this column where you would tell us the amount of each line item expense.
Now let's look at the same chart, anticipated project expenses, with some examples. The first expense line listed is Project Manager. This organization has indicated in brackets that the project manager is a new temporary position, and the application notes that the organization is going to contract this person to lead the MIIG project. If the position was not new, and instead was an existing staff person, the organization would need to include a letter from a senior staff person, such as an executive director, stating that the existing staff person would be working additional hours above and beyond their regular time and duties towards the MIIG project. The organization is showing us in the quote source column how they arrived at the total cost. The project manager will be paid $30 an hour, 15 hours a week, for 50 weeks. The organization put in brackets JD, short for job description, indicating that a job description has been attached along with the application package. Note, a job description is required for any new MIIG-funded position. The total cost of this expense is $22,500. The next expense is speaker fees. This organization has indicated in its application that it will have one speaker at each of the 4 community dialogues about equity, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. The organization is showing in the quote source column that it determined the cost of this expense with a quote from ABC Consulting. The organization has indicated here in brackets that it has included a quote from the speakers as a separate document in the application package. The total cost of this expense is $10,000. The next expense is brochure publishing costs. The organization has indicated in its application that it will distribute brochures at each of the 4 community dialogues. The organization has indicated in the quote source column that it received a quote from XYZ Publishers. The organization has indicated in brackets a web link to this publisher company where it received information on the cost of this project expense. The total cost of this expense is $5,000. The next expense is venue rental costs. As a helpful tip, if your quote includes multiple expense items, they can be listed on one line. In this example, the organization has indicated that this expense line item includes audiovisual or AV equipment. The organization is showing in the quote source column that it went to the website of the vendor, AB Venue Rentals, to determine the amount of this expense. The organization has indicated in brackets that a quote has been included with the application package so that we can verify the total cost of this line item. And the total cost of this expense is $2,500. Finally, the total for all anticipated project expenses, total A, is $40,000.
To recap, there are a few ways you can share information with us about your quote source. You can do this by listing the name of the vendor or company that gave you a quote source for the project. It's a good idea in this case to put in brackets that you have included the quote as a separate document in your application package. Or you could list the name of the website if you determine the amount of your project expense by visiting a website. In some circumstances, it might not be possible to provide a quote from a vendor or a website. In our example, the salary of the contracted project manager was the calculation determined by the organization's internal policies. But in such a case, you will need to tell us how you calculated the cost of the expense line item. If our team sees that this column is blank, we will have to follow up with you by email or phone.
This slide is showing the donated labor chart within the MIIG budget. Donated labor is one of two ways that a MIIG applicant can match the MIIG grant with in-kind donations, the other being donated material or service, which we will talk about in a couple minutes. As mentioned earlier, donations are a bit unusual in the budget because they appear as both a revenue and an expense. It's in this chart where you will have the opportunity to give us all the context we need about the donated labor. You can find all the information you need about matching in Section 5 of the MIIG Guidelines, Matching Requirements. Section 5.2 specifically discusses matching of donated labor and materials and services. Section 5.2.1 discusses the value of donated labor for projects. Donated labor includes time spent by staff, volunteers, or directors of an organization's board on your project. The value of donated labor for MIIG projects is based on $20 an hour for unskilled labor working directly on the project, and $35 an hour for skilled labor. Skilled labor includes qualified trades and professional services specific to components of the project, such as artists, photographers, and/or elders, knowledge keepers. Remember that as per Section 5.2.2 of the MIIG Guidelines, you need to keep track of all donated labor for accounting purposes in case we need to ask down the road after project completion. These logs of donated labor are called volunteer sign-in sheets for the project, and they should include date, name, signature, nature of the work provided, number of hours worked, rate per hour, and total value.
Continuing with the donated labor chart, the total value of work, so that's the column on the very right, is auto-populated by a calculation of the number of volunteers multiplied by total hours worked multiplied by rate per hour. You need to enter numbers in these three fields for the calculation to appear in the last column, total value of work. In this example, the organization has received an in-kind donation for the graphic design of its brochure for the community dialogues. This column is where you would describe the work that is being done. This description should make it clear how the work relates to your MIIG project. If it is not clear from the description how the work relates to your MIIG project, please provide further information in a separate document to be submitted with your budget and application package. In such a case, the description would read, Graphic design for brochure, see attachment A for further details. This organization is reporting that the donated labor will include the work of one volunteer in the second column, who will donate an estimated 40 hours of labor in the third column at a rate of $35 per hour in the fourth column, because the graphic designer is considered a skilled labor. The final column automatically makes the calculation using an Excel formula telling us the total value of work in this example. This is $1,400. The total of the section, total B, also automatically calculates. If you had a number of donated labor items, they would all be totaled. In this case, only one instance of donated labor for the graphic design of the brochure, total B, equals $1,400.
This is the final chart in the budget template, donated material or services. Section 5.2.1 of the MIIG guidelines notes that donated materials and professional services are valued at verified fair market value. In the first column, we ask you to describe the material or service being donated. In the second column, we ask you to tell us what organization or company is making the donation to your MIIG project. The donated material or service needs to include a letter submitted along with your application and budget as a separate attachment, which needs to tell us two things: what will be donated to your project and the amount of the donation. Remember that as per section 5.2.2 of the MIIG guidelines, you'll need to keep a record of donations. We ask you to retain donation letters on business letterhead or invoices, clearly indicating the fair market value of the professional services or materials that have been donated by the business or organization. The final column tells us the total value of the material or service.
This is the same slide as the previous one, but with a couple examples of donated materials and services. The first line item is cultural dance artists. The application has indicated that our MIIG applicant is planning to feature culturally appropriate dance artists at its community conversations as a way of stimulating conversation. The services of the cultural dance artist is being donated by the Multicultural Dance Society, which has provided a letter along with the budget and application that verifies this donation. The total value of the donated materials and service is $5,000. The second line item is a venue rental discount. This discount was provided to the MIIG applicant to rent a space in which it will hold its community conversations. This discount on revenue rent is considered a legitimate donation of a material or service. The venue rental discount has been donated by AB Venue Rentals, and the MIIG applicant has indicated that our team should take a look at the attached quote to verify this donation. The total value of this donated materials or service is $3,600. The total of the section on donated materials and services, total C, is $8,600. This figure is calculated automatically through an Excel formula. This is an interesting example because AB Venue Rentals provided a quote to our MIIG applicant that will serve two purposes to our team. It verifies one of the anticipated project expenses, but it also verifies the donated materials and service. We will take a look at this example quote on the next slide. This slide is a sample quote from a vendor, which can also be seen on our website. Interestingly, this quote serves as both an estimate on an anticipated project expense for a MIIG project and as a letter that verifies a donated materials and service. The top arrow points to the donated materials and service from this vendor in the amount of $3,600. This represents this vendor's discount for nonprofits. This amount was captured on the previous slide in the donated materials and service chart and is counted towards the applicant's matching funds. The second arrow points to the actual cash costs incurred by the organization in the amount of $2,500, which was therefore captured in the chart on anticipated project expenses.
So depending on the items included in your budget, there may be a number of additional pieces of information our team needs as a way of verifying your budget items. This table is an overview of the items found within a budget and the additional information our team requires in order to verify those items and complete our grant review. The table also indicates whether we need those items now, meaning when you submit your application and budget package, or later, meaning it's a piece of information we may require down the road when thinking about final accountability reporting. So just to go over this table quickly, if your item was a cash contribution as a revenue, the additional information that we'll require will be financial statements or bank statements if financial statements aren't available. Another item is any revenue that is listed in the pending column. So we'll need to know when will that be confirmed, and do you have a backup plan if that funding doesn't come through? If you list any funding from a municipal funder, the Government of Alberta, Government of Canada, or another funder like a private donor. The additional information we'll require will be a letter or email from the funder. If you list a project expense, you should always strive to include a quote source with that expense. So that could include a letter from a vendor or company, a link to a website, or a calculation at how you arrived at the anticipated project expense. If one of those expenses is a new hire to lead your MIIG project, you should include a job description with your application package. If one of the expenses is for existing staff to work additional hours above and beyond their regular duties towards the MIIG project, you should include a letter, email from a supervisor. If one of your items is donated labor, you need to keep a log of donated labor, what we call volunteer sign-in sheets. And that's something we might ask for down the road as part of final accountability reporting. If your budget includes donated material or services, you should include a donation letter on business letterhead at the time you submit your application. And you should also keep track of all donation letters on business letterhead and keep them on file in case we need to look at them later when we're thinking about final accountability reporting.
To demystify the process, once you submit your applications, we just wanted to say a few words. When you submit an application, a member of our team, which is usually Cheryl, is responsible for the intake and initial process of your submission. Then the Community Grants Advisor, Ben, or myself, the MIIG Program Coordinator, reviews your application and all supporting documents. After this initial review, you can expect to receive a phone call and/or email from us in case we have any follow-up questions for you. We generally give you anywhere from 3 to 5 business days to respond to these requests to give you adequate time to gather the information. Following this stage, a grant review panel is convened, which then makes a recommendation to our department leaders on whether the project should be funded or not. Just a reminder that MIIG applications need to be submitted by September 1st. Notification of whether your application has been successful or not will be approximately in February of next year. After September, the next intake of MIIG applications will be March 1st, 2022.
So we'll just take a brief pause for questions. And really, we just want to thank you very much for being with us today. We appreciated the opportunity to connect with you and have a conversation about the program. As always, please reach out to us if you have further questions or need some one-on-one support in thinking about your application. So thank you again, and we wish you a wonderful day.